David just gave part of my introduction here, but that's fine. Before I introduce the speaker, I want to give you just a quick update on this club's activity and commitment to literacy, and specifically to early childhood literacy. Let me introduce a couple guests. One guest, Ashley Bodmer, is the Executive Director of eCare, and but sitting next to her is our own Susan O'Connor, who's on our board. I want to recognize her. Jean Norman is the other Rotarian that sits on our board, so Rotary is well represented there. You may or may not know that March is Literacy Month for International Rotary, and literacy has been an emphasis of Rotary for all the years that I've been involved in Rotary, and I assume it will continue to be in the years to come. And when it comes to literacy, this club has a long history of supporting literacy causes. As David mentioned, several years ago, for those of you that are newer to the club, this club chose to focus on early childhood education when we agreed to financially support a new program that was developed by the school district called We Read, W-E-E, Read. It was observed then by the people that proposed this organization, as now, that children are being dropped off at daycare centers during their formative years, and we're not getting the proper training at the daycare or at home for that matter. And of course there are many reasons for that that we can go into, but we won't. We Read intended and had as part of their plan to focus on the daycare, the learning environment of the daycare center, the teachers in daycare, the parents of the children in daycare, and of course the children themselves. And over the years, many of you have helped us with family nights, with mentoring, reading to these children, delivering books, and certainly financial support. So we've been a big part of that since we formed that relationship with them. eCare then was formed, and it was kind of an outshoot of that, to continue with We Read and to add other components, particularly mentoring. We also wanted to focus our activities on the inner city area where we have the most impoverished kids, the greatest need, and hopefully can achieve the best results. In other words, we expanded on the We Read program, but fine-tuned it to focus on the most vulnerable and those with the greatest need. We put some flyers on the table that you might have interest that talks more about what we do and our plan for next year. Currently we have 80 mentors working one-on-one with children. Next year we intend to expand that to 125. And this is an important part of what we're doing. But let me say that this Rotary Club started this effort, and as David said, has been a primary sponsor of early childhood education long before it was kind of fashionable, what you'll hear about today. And the goal of this partnership has always been to assure children are prepared for kindergarten, so they're ready to learn and become our educated workforce. And I want to thank all of you for what you've given as part of this club, because your generosity has made this all possible. Let me introduce our speaker. Our speaker today is an expert in this field. She studied this field and understands the critical importance of early intervention with children. Alisa Ghazvini has a PhD in child development and currently works as an early childhood consultant. She has over 25 years of experience in the early childhood field. Alisa has operated a preschool program, served on the faculty at Florida State University Department of Family and Child Sciences, held leadership positions in statewide early childhood organizations. She has served in leadership roles related to the development of Florida's early learning standards, early childhood professional development competencies, and statewide child screening protocols. She has provided policy and program evaluation services to several state agencies and organizations. She has authored numerous policy papers and several research articles. Let us welcome Alisa Ghazvini.
honor to be here today. I've heard a lot about what a distinguished club that I'm speaking before. And obviously you have a long history of supporting early childhood. So I'm hoping today to just give you a little maybe new information or refresh you so that you're committed more than ever to continuing your cause with early childhood. So let's talk a little bit, let's look at some facts first about early childhood. So today what I want to leave you with is 5 numbers that I want you to remember. So we're going to talk about 700 per second, 18 months, 90 to 100%, 3 to 1 odds, and $4 to $9. So 5 numbers. And a lot of this is based on research that has been done across the United States, but the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard has put a lot of this together, so if you're looking for further references. Okay, first number was 700. The early years matter because in the first few years of life, a lot of brain activity is happening. When a baby is born, there are all these neurons firing in their brain, and that early interaction between their environment and their genes is at a high point. And so we get 700 new neural connections per second in the early years of life. And so if you see from the slide, the first slide shot there on the left is at birth. You see how many neural connections there are. The second one is 6 years, and the last one over on the right is 14 years. So what happens is we have babies, you know, you've all held a baby, and the baby opens their eyes wider or sticks out their tongue, and of course you do the same thing back to them, right? And so there's this whole serve and return, these wonderful interactions that happen between adults and children, and we know that those are extremely important. The interactions the baby has with their environment, but particularly with adults, tells them that they impact their environment. They can make things happen. And so we have all these connections happening in their brains if they're exposed to these wonderful adult-child interactions. Developmental scientists call this contingent reciprocity. These brain connections build the foundation upon which all later learning, behavior, and health depend. That's a big statement. All later learning, behavior, and health depend. It's kind of like the building that's going up next door. The really important part is a solid foundation. Same thing with the baby's brain and those neural connections. We need a very solid foundation in order for later learning, development, behavior, and health to be good. So that we need that. All right, our second number was 18. 18 months. So early experiences in the environment, we've said, have a lasting impact on later success in school and life. We now know that barriers to children's educational achievements start very early, and they continue to grow without early intervention. Wonderful researchers by the name of Hart and Grizzly were very interested. They began their research looking at children in school. And they were fascinated with what is it that's happening that we see such disparities in children that do well in school and those that don't. They narrate it says, well, literacy really matters a whole lot. Being able to read kind of you have to do that to do well in school in just about any subject. So they started looking at that. And then they did longitudinal research, and they followed a large sample of children from birth well into their school years. And they found that differences in the size of the children's vocabulary first appear at 18 months of age. So as you see on that chart, right about 18 months of age, we start to see those 3 different lines really separate there. And those differences are based on whether the child was born into a family with high education and income or a family with low education and income. So by age 3, children with college-educated parents or primary caregivers had vocabularies 2 to 3 times larger than those children whose parents had not completed high school. So again, just saying really strong things about your focus on literacy here. By the time these children enter school, they are already behind their peers, and it becomes increasingly harder to catch up and increasingly more expensive. Remediation is a lot more expensive than the money you're putting in early to get books in children's hands to help parents understand how important literacy is. Okay, the next number was 90 to 100. Fascinating study. It's called the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. This was actually a doctor who began his work working with obese women. And he was fascinated because he would see his group of clients, his patients, do really well, they'd lose weight, and then all of a sudden they would gain it all back and more. And he was like, what is going on? So he began doing some research into what were the real root causes, and now has years and years and a huge sample. He's done this research across the country with large sample sizes, men and women, and he's found that significant adversity early in life impairs development in the later years, and particularly in the first 3 years of life. The more adversity a child faces, the greater odds of, in this slide, of a developmental delay. So here we see, and adversity, risk factors can be things like poverty, maternal depression or caregiver mental illness, child maltreatment, a single parent, low maternal education. All those things can have, any one of those is hard, but when you put cumulative risk factors together, they have major impacts on children. So as we see here, those children exposed to 6 or 7 risk factors face a 90 to 100% chance of having a developmental delay. Developmental delays have such significant impact. Think about the child you've seen with a developmental delay. It has a very personal, individual impact, how it affects that family, and then the resources that we all have to support as a community to help that child. All right, our next number was 3 to 1. 3 to 1 odds. Same study. So early experiences actually get into the body with lifelong effects. Not just on cognitive and emotional development, but on physical health as well. This is one of our newest areas of research connected to early childhood, is the impact of what happens young, how it impacts our health lifelong. So there's a growing body of evidence now that links significant adversity in childhood to increased risk of adult health problems. In this slide, we're looking at a 3 to 1 odds of adult health disease if you have 7 to 8 adverse childhood experiences. But risk, it also affects other health, can also influence other health problems, adult health problems, including diabetes, hypertension, stroke, obesity, and some forms of cancer have even been linked to adverse childhood experiences. So, and we also know that children between birth and 3 years of age are at the most risk of being maltreated. So again, the importance of intervening early and helping these children out. Oh. Here's our graph. Okay. The last number for you to remember was 4 to 9. And this is $4 to $9. Providing young children with a healthy environment in which to learn and grow is not only good for that child's development, but it's good for all of us. Economists have done a lot of research in this area now, and they show that high-quality early childhood programs bring impressive returns on investment. And I have to emphasize the high quality. As Jim mentioned before, we have a number of child care programs. It's a hard area to work in. People don't get paid a whole lot. We ask families to primarily pay for that at a time in their life when they're least likely to have the financial resources because they're just starting out. Yet it is such an important time and such an important choice about who cares for our children. But if we can afford to have high quality programs, we know that they can have such a positive impact on children's lives. We have a number of long-term, very rigorous studies that have looked at high-quality child care programs for low-income children, and we find that between $4 and $9 for every dollar invested is returned. Program participants followed into adulthood benefited from increased earnings, and the public saw returns in the form of reduced special education and remediation costs, reduced dependence on welfare, and fewer crimes committed and crime costs, as well as increased tax revenues because individuals are more likely to be working and to have home ownership and those kind of things. Okay, so there are our numbers. 700 new neurons per second, 18 months when we start to see differences if we don't have good early literacy experiences, 90 to 100% chance of a developmental disability if you have 6 to 7 adverse childhood experiences, 3 to 1 odds of adult heart disease if you have 7 to 8 adverse childhood experiences, and $4 to $9 that we save as community members if we invest $1 in early childhood. So what are these 5 numbers telling us? They're telling us that getting things right the first time is a lot easier and more effective than trying to fix them later. It also tells us that early childhood really matters because experiences early in life can have a lasting impact on later learning, behavior, and health. And it also tells us that highly specialized interventions are needed as early as possible for those children that really have toxic stress going on, many different adverse experiences. And that early experiences get into our body and into our skin, and that it not only affects development and how we do academically, but our health and mental health, physical and mental health. And we also need to know that all society benefits from a focus on early childhood. So we have quite an opportunity, and you here at this Rotary Club have recognized that for a long time. Stable and supportive relationships, language-rich environments, and responsive interactions can and do might make quite a difference in children's lives. Your focus here in Escambia on language and literacy is so important for families that live in poverty, families that are under stress, young families that often don't have family supports. We live in a very mobile society. I know I was very fortunate when I was raising my children that both sets of parents were close by, but for most young families that is not the case. So they need others in the community like you to lend a hand. So you have a wonderful program, eCare, Every Child a Reader. It has a three-pronged approach. Reading pals, where you actually help with the child, with language and literacy. You have a reread, where it's professional development for those child care, early care, and education teachers to help make sure they have the resources and the knowledge they need to do a good job with young children. The family nights, to help families understand how powerful those words are. If you grew up in a home where children were not talked to, but talked at, and the words you heard most often were negative, that there weren't a lot of books around, you don't know that you need to do those things for your child, because that's what you were used to. So the importance of intervening and helping families understand literacy is very important. I was very impressed when looking at your e-care program here in Pensacola, the evaluation component. So many times we do interventions, but we don't do the evaluation behind it so that we can document that we're really making a difference. E-care has done that. So you have the evidence right before you here in this community that what you're doing is making a difference. And I know there are many ways. I know this club supports financially, but there are other ways that you can also help if you're involved in other organizations and businesses, that you could tell them about e-care. You could be a sponsor, a volunteer. Those offer your employees some flex time to volunteer would be a great way to support it as well. And book drives. I have watched in the Early Learning Coalition, the one in Tallahassee, they have a book room. And every child that comes in that front door with a parent who's trying to get some information about child care, none of them leave without a book in their hand. And I have watched their eyes light up because they get to take home a book with them. So book drives are really very powerful too. I just want to end by saying that your work really makes a difference. I have seen it. I've read the research behind your evaluation here and our evaluation in this nation and internationally about what a difference a focus on early childhood can make. So I want to personally thank all of you for supporting early childhood, and would take any questions. Okay, so the question had to do with the pressures about budgets, and there is a lot of attention on early childhood. There's some debate about early childhood. Does it work? Does it not? Head Start, does it work? Does it not? I'm very optimistic. I think we have the science behind us now. There is some debate about what works and what doesn't work, and often what if we really delve into a lot of the research, you have to think about that child that is in the family who doesn't have the parent that is constantly talking to them, explaining things, pointing to signs, has books in the house, sees their parents reading newspapers. That child that doesn't have that, even if we help them catch up some, they're still going to be usually a little bit behind. So some of the Head Start studies, that's what it's found. We've also found in that particular research, there's some research at Harvard that's been going on, and it's in an area called executive function skills. And those are the skills that help us attune to more than one thing at one time, to wait and be patient till something happens, to hold more than one thought in our mind at a time. We actually find that those skills are the ones that have the most impact on success in life. So being able to get a job and keep it. And we find that Head Start, early childhood programs are really good at helping those kids at risk develop executive function skills. And our governor did put out a proposed budget with some increases for early childhood funding. So I'm optimistic.
What does the research show for other cultures, say the Chinese, the Japanese? Have they looked at early childhood, and do they do it the same way we do, or different?
Good question. Internationally, what are some of the differences? It's been a few years since I looked at all that research. I actually did a whole review of international data. There is, in some countries, particularly European countries, a lot more focus on early childhood, particularly for 2 to 3, 4-year-olds. They put a lot more funding, government funding, into that age group, but here's what they do for the babies and the toddlers, is they give family leave so that there is money to support parents staying home for the first couple of years, and then they put the government money more into the other early childhood programs and to make sure they're high quality. That's in Europe. And in Japan, there's a lot of parental involvement for the first few years, but they too start young, again 3 or 4. So I guess the major difference when I looked at the data was there's more government funding in early childhood in a lot of other countries, but there's also a lot more supports to help parents stay home for the first couple of years.
I noticed that one of the risk factors that you listed was single parents, and the statistics that you see now, it's almost shocking. What do you make of that?
The question had to do with the risk factor of being a single parent and is there a light at the end of the tunnel. I really don't know. I think it's very hard. We can all imagine how hard it would be to be a mom and have particularly more than one child that you're responsible for. And particularly that single parent that doesn't have relatives close by. I think the light at the end of the tunnel has to do with us concentrating on having community early childhood supports, like what you're helping fund, and helping that mom or dad understand the importance of what happens at home and talking to their children and those kind of things.
Has there been any movement towards workplace? In other words, like a working mom has 3 kids, she can't afford daycare because she's not making enough, and of course the business is not going to really pay for it, but any way of assisting in having that sort of daycare for workers?
We haven't seen as much of that in Florida. There certainly are some. You see that much more likely in some of our larger cities. I've visited programs, particularly in the Northeast. But we do have some large companies that are opening, having child care, early care, and education programs on site. And we have some large corporations that are kind of running those type of programs for businesses. I've visited one over in Jacksonville that is very successful. It's associated with a bank over there, and the parents, of course, absolutely love it because they can drop in on their breaks and see their child, have lunch with them. And we do have a lot of research that documents the savings to the business because parents are more dependable if they have dependable child care. If they don't have to worry about their child, they're more likely to be on time and be at work with a good attitude. So we'll see if more businesses go on.
Lisa, thank you very much, and we appreciate you driving all the way from Tallahassee to talk to us today, and here's a cup and recognition.